Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Max Wolf, and I'm the Public Policy Manager at the Charles River Chamber. We're happy to bring to you a conversation with the two candidates running for one seat on the Needham Planning Board ahead of the April 14th townwide election. Today, you hear from Oscar Mertz and Gary Lesanto. In case you do not know, the Needham Planning Board plays an important role in economic development in town by reviewing and reshaping projects like new housing, commercial spaces, and mixed use developments. The board is also the architect of zoning changes in town. They help decide what gets built where, making them a key decision maker for growth and investment in the community. As for the parameters of this debate, this will be a 1 hour debate. There'll be no opening statement, but each candidate will have 90 seconds to complete a closing one. Other than that closing statement, we will not be using a timer, but I do ask that each candidate be respectful of each other's time, keep their answers concise, and focus on the questions asked. I do reserve the right to interrupt and probably will do so in the interest of time. Finally, I did let the candidates know the last question of today's debate, which is who would be on your Needham Mount Rushmore? So let's get into it. I'd like to start with both of you introducing yourselves a little bit, giving your professional background and experience in town. Oscar, could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I've lived in Needham. Thank you very much, Max. Thank you very much, Chamber. Really happy to be here as a candidate. And hi, Gary. Look forward to our conversations together and to seeing how town wants to decide. So I've been living here for 33 years. Raised our son, Kathy and I, and have lived in two houses. I have been involved in a number of committees recently that have been a good opportunity to get to understand a lot of the issues facing the town. But I have been an architect and a planner for more than 40 years in my life, working on buildings and planning projects in this area in the U.S. and around the world. So I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar. And Gary?
Yes, thank you, Max, and to the Chamber for hosting this debate. Um, I've been in Needham now for 25 years. My wife and I, we built our home here then and raised our two sons, Nick and Chris, who went through the school system and enjoyed all the niceties that Needham has to offer and the town and the school system and the sports programs. Um, my wife is a special ed teacher here at Sunita Williams. Um, and for me professionally, I've been a builder, developer, and property manager for just about the last 30 years. Although I'm moving into semi-retirement now, I have a lifetime of experience being on the other side of the table, watching developments and how they develop from an idea on paper to something that's implemented in the real world and how they go through the boards and forums. And so I look forward to this debate, and I look forward to, if fortunate enough to get on the board to be able to implement some of that skill set.
Great. So it's pretty clear that the four-lane alternative for Great Plains Avenue is the favorite, at least from the survey and the sentiment in town. And it seems like, for better or for worse, we're going to be keeping four lanes on Great Plain. So if we're not changing that, I was wondering, how can we help our businesses in Needham Center? How can we make that area more vibrant? We'll start with Gary here.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Max. Well, I've been doing a lot of door to door, and that includes going to all the local businesses downtown and asking them what they thought about the envisioned solutions, as well as what they think about the business environment. And I got a lot of feedback, which I've enjoyed throughout this campaign. I have to say, overwhelmingly, just like the survey reported, I just got numerous comments that people felt that the four lane was the best option for them in their business. I think that they felt that parking was of a large concern with some of the other alternatives, but not just on the four-lane parking, just parking in general. A lot of comments about updating meters downtown, making it easier for people to get there, possibly coming up with some ways, to loosen parking or have more parking in the downtown. So I think those would be great places to start. Also bringing in like some municipal travel, like they used to have with the bus back in the day to get more activity into the downtown. I know undoubtedly we'll have some growth now with the new MBTA Act and other things in the town. So that's going to help with some density down there, which is great. But I think density is only as good as you allow parking for people to easily access. Fixing the meter problem, I think, would be helpful. And so if I'm hearing my residents correctly, I think those would be some areas I would focus on.
And Oscar? I think you're on mute, Oscar.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. Everything that Gary said is true. I've also done my own walking and talking with a lot of the small business owners and landlords and property managers. And there are lots of concerns. I think the process of supporting our businesses also is about talking and listening and helping with streamlining their own process of getting things approved and getting things built and adjusted in town. Obviously, getting through COVID was huge. And bringing the dining life to the streets has been fantastic. We can do more. We need to, program Town Green, get stuff going. Summers are challenging, so whatever we can do to be creative to help our businesses and just to bring people, downtown. Efficient spending of money, knowing the problems, solving the problems, doing the work for stormwater, but also some beautification work is key. Obviously, parking and service to the businesses is top of mind. And safety. I think there's no question we got a lot of cars moving through town, and so the efforts to give incentives to be aware of pedestrians, I think, is key, and that is doing some of the curb, bulb, basically shortening the crosswalks, and also providing some awareness of the fact that this is really a small downtown that we want to keep vibrant, but also want to keep safe.
And when you say shortening the crosswalks,
Well, when you look at the what would happen in those design solutions, no matter which one they were, there are the little details of sort of you kind of round out. It's called a bulb. You kind of round out those edges, and it just brings you can see it when you look at the new intersections right around Town Green. So you're essentially creating a slightly shorter distance for a pedestrian to walk across the street by bringing a little curb at the corner out. So it's a minor detail it's in all the plans, whether it's a
yes.
2, 3, or 4 lane plan. So it's just those minor things, and it also, it creates the awareness and of the pedestrians when they're at those crosswalks. So those are all important things for visual security. I know right in front of Tin Rabbit, that particular crosswalk can just be even improved with a signal, so that people see people coming across. She's been aware of seeing almost accidents right there. So thank you.
And Oscar, you mentioned COVID for a little bit in restaurants, and Needham restaurants, their revenue is only up 9% since the pandemic. That's well below inflation. Meanwhile, in Newton and Wellesley, where their restaurants have gains of upwards of 25% and 42%. They're simply doing a lot better than our Needham restaurants. So what can we do to help them specifically, help them grow and help them flourish? We'll start with Oscar here.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. Well, to some extent, I think we are also known for challenging review process to get things approved and support what they need to do. I think that needs to get looked at a little bit tighter and more streamlined to support them and listen to them. And I think at the end, we also have to be mindful of getting more programming to help those restaurants have a little bit more exposure or more opportunities to attract dining. We are obviously seeing a growth in our whole dining, constellation of restaurants, and that is very encouraging to see. But I think we can do better. Those numbers are, tell us that we have to work harder. So I would say the more we can support all of our businesses, and in particular the restaurants, which bring a lot of activity and a lot of other people to town, not just our local people. It is the restaurants that are the destinations for people coming from other towns. So I think it is a matter of supporting them and helping them.
Thank you. And Gary, same question to you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Max. I watched the chamber debate with the select board people last week when you did it, and I know you asked the same question. So I was curious about it because, being from Needham, I mean, my wife and I and my kids, we patronize all these restaurants frequently. I know a lot of the owners personally, and I wanted to, after that debate, I went down and I talked to a lot of them. I actually went in and sat down with a few and went over the numbers, and I'm sure your numbers are accurate. I'm not questioning that, but I asked them how they felt that they were doing in the restaurant industry specifically. And overwhelmingly, I got that they were very happy with where they were as far as their volume. The same complaints came back up as far as parking, accessibility, maybe trying to get more people downtown. There was some discussions about, when they went to do permits to either expand or upgrade, that there was a little bit of red tape involved. And so I made some notes on that, things that I think would help to facilitate them. But I'd just like to say overwhelmingly, a lot of them were very happy with where they are and understanding that everybody wants to grow. And I understand they want to grow. I think the things that I just said previously about bringing, when we have the density coming into town a little bit through MBTA and other methods, as long as we have the parking, we update the meters, we help these businesses in every way from the municipality to help them advertise and promote, bringing in like a minibus or some kind of inter-town travel to be able to bring people that wouldn't otherwise get down to the downtown center, like whether it's elderly, senior citizens, kids, right? If we can get them down there more, I think all of that would help to raise that number. But I was just really happy to know that the restaurants that are here, as I thought, are very happy to be here. They love being here in Needham, and I certainly love patronizing them. So I'll do anything and everything I can to help them in any way going forward.
Yeah, I'm sure they're. I mean, I'm sure they're happy to be there. But these statistics come from our meals tax revenue, and if you compare to other towns, it's really, especially our other peer chamber communities, it's striking how low it is. So it's definitely a concern of the chamber. And when we talk to restaurants, there's definitely a mixed response on how that rebound post pandemic has been.
Yeah, listen, I'm sure everybody would love to go 25%. I'm just saying the people that I talked to, and there were many, were happy with the growth that they had. Not that they don't want to grow further. And I think I outlined some ideas on how to make that happen that are realistic. But overwhelmingly, I wanted to share that the restaurants I talked to weren't talking from a standpoint of struggling. They acknowledged the growth that they had, and they were looking for some ways to enjoy further growth.
Okay. I think both of you mentioned streamlining of permitting. One thing our restaurants tell us, and Newton has actually done, is significantly reduced and eliminated commercial parking minimums. When your business is expanding, you need a special permit to add a couple tables, a special permit if you want to, move locations across town. This special permit's a real barrier, and it keeps storefronts vacant. I'm wondering whether you agree that Needham should eliminate commercial parking minimums or reduce them in order to clear some of this red tape. We'll start with Gary here.
Yeah, I think eliminate's a strong word, Max. I've looked into some of the bylaws in that regards. I certainly, I'm pro parking, right? I believe that you can't have one with the other. If you're going to add density somewhere or you're trying to help businesses out, parking to me is the staple. That is the foundation of where it all is going to begin. So I'm certainly a proponent of reducing restrictions on parking and looking at any and every way to add parking, as long as it fits into the scale and character of the neighborhood in which it's being applied. But I think it's forefront. I mean, you can't, if you have one without the other, you can actually have a detrimental effect. You can have an inverse relationship to growth, or not growth, but to helping the business activity. So I'm all for reducing to looking at ways to incentivize. I don't think I would use the word eliminate, but I think modify and encourage are better words for me.
And Oscar, these special permits are often waived, and they don't really add any parking in the end. Would you be in favor of eliminating or reducing these commercial parking minimums?
No, I agree with Gary. I think the parking is crucial to this. I would not eliminate parking, but I think there's some clever ways. Well, it's a combination of things. We know we've done a couple of parking surveys for Needham, and we know that we actually have capacity, but we also have restrictions on a lot of these lots that are in town and around town that support the businesses. And I think if we were to be able to be better stewards of some of those surrounding lots, Walgreens behind 88 Great Plain, and we've done things behind CVS, that we could then manage those, and then combining that with meters, where we might do some surge rates. So you might incentivize people at a cheaper rate to park a little bit further away. And then you can allow for us to control sort of the immediate access at a higher rate on the street. So some smart thinking about that, I think, and planning about how we use what we have. Because we have parking, we just have to make sure we're using it as efficiently as possible.
So you said we have capacity. So you don't think we need to build more parking?
No, right now I think we know we have the capacity. We've done all these tests. I think it's a question of where, and then how you get at it and how you use it. So I think with the new parking meters that are coming in, we'll have some control to be able to adjust rates, and you could say charge a little bit more for short-term parking in front of stores. Or depending, again, it's going to be a question of timing when we want to do all these things and study what the impacts would be to do those kinds of rate adjustments. But it's a way to control a little bit how our parking is used so that it's efficiently used and we have access where we need it for the people who want to just come in and do a quick errand.
Yeah, Gary, would you agree that we have capacity, and do you think we
No,
don't need to build parking?
I wouldn't. I think we have capacity for the density that we have right now. Upgrading the meters is certainly going to be helpful, but it doesn't add capacity. I mean, you can tighten the time and charge people a higher rate to influence turnover. You take that into account. I think it's ample for what we have for density now. Walgreens, CVS, those are privately held parking lots. Yeah, people use them and they help with capacity for what we have now. But if we add density in any shape or form in the downtown and it doesn't provide its own adequate parking, then that's going to be a burden on what we already have for our infrastructure in that regard. So I think, you need to look at, if density comes in, what that density is and how it's gonna self park itself. And that's a very important aspect to me. And then other avenues of people that would build parking, in and around the downtown, commercial property owners that choose that path, I think is imperative. Like I said, if the town is going to increase in density, it has to increase in parking in a thoughtful, gradual way. But one without the other just creates high impact density problems where you get too much traffic, not enough parking, and then you get like a downtown that actually people would drive through instead of stopping to patronize the businesses because they can't park easily. So I would be in favor of looking to relax those standards.
Oscar, I'm interested. You were involved in, the MBTA communities act zoning, and those, residential projects. If they do come in, they will have parking minimums. Do you think that, you said we have capacity now, but do we have capacity if there were to be a lot of projects proposed and built?
No, we absolutely have to figure out how we want to relax the parking rates for development that we would like to encourage to come into town. The challenges with doing what we have now, and we've heard from a lot of developers and business owners in town that what we have done with our overlay zoning for downtown has a high burden on that parking rate. So we need to adjust those rates to make it more convenient for these developers to be able to build something with less requirements.
Do you mean reducing parking minimums in residential?
Reducing parking minimums.
Yeah.
And as I said, about making more efficient use of the current parking lots we have. So a kind of an over management or an Uber management of those facilities for Walgreens and for other parking lots. Yes, we would. The town has considered, contributing or having a structured parking deck, in and around that center parking lot next to the station. And further development around town could have some strategic parking that's brought in with that additional development. And all of that stuff has to be thought of carefully because it can be done with shared use and shared access to transit. There are plenty of examples of those things, but there's some investment there that has to also have payback for whoever's going to be doing that, whether the town's contributing to that or whether there is, the developers are getting some additional relief to be able to build the parking. It's always the hardest thing to do. So we know that it's a big burden on development. So we'd have to be careful to figure out how we can do it strategically and make it as efficient and shared in use as much as possible.
Gary, did you want to follow
Yeah,
up there?
just a brief follow-up. Obviously, I've explained my position on parking, but I differ with Oscar in that I think, when a developer develops under the MBTA or overlay or whatever it is, I feel it needs to be the responsibility of the developer to self-provide the parking for the density it wants to create in the town. If it's going to bring density to the town, it should do it. So I'm not in favor of reducing minimums for the developer. I'm in favor of reducing restrictions for private owners that want to build parking. Or any incentives to get parking built in the downtown. But when a developer comes in with a project, they should allow for parking for it that's going to be ample, right? And I get very concerned when that doesn't happen because that creates an overflow problem. It puts a burden on our street parking. It's going to put a burden on the Walgreens and CVS and other areas. People will be parking in the senior center, for example. They'll be parking in the T parking lot. Those are things that you don't want to encourage, in my opinion. If a developer comes in, they're going to build in, they're going to make money, they're going to add density to the project, self-contain your parking. And so I don't agree in the minimum standards. I agree in holding them to at least self-contain what they're proposing to add to our town. Thank you.
Oscar, do you have a response there for residential parking minimums?
I think that you do provide a minimum because the market's going to decide, the individual builder is going to decide, developer is going to decide what he needs to serve his particular project. So, the need for all of this is to have an understanding of where individual projects are going to build their own parking, and they're going to decide what they're going to need based on I think it's fair to say that if you provide a minimum requirement, that's an understanding that there's a market force that's going to perhaps raise that, and that's an individual decision by a developer. So I'm for giving the developer and the market the ability to drive what that traffic needs to be. We know that these downtown areas have many other sources of transportation. And so a lot of people who are coming there are also either without a lot of bringing their cars or parking. So it's important that we think about this holistically with other sources of transportation to support that. And so we are being mindful of the fact that it's an environmental impact, and we need to understand how parking is used by all the different users.
And I would just add, I would disagree with allowing a developer to decide on what parking they feel is adequate, because developers want to maximize their units and they're going to minimize parking. Even on the West Street project, it's just approved now, 189 units and 181 parking. So a developer is going to develop. That's what they're going to do. They're going to propose the highest density that they can and have the lowest parking that they can. So they want the minimums. Representing the town in the interest of the town, you have to find that balance, and someone needs to advocate for the town. The developer may or may not be doing that, but I can tell you in general, developers are, they're concerned with what they're developing. That's their interest, that's their priority, and that's what they should be focused on. It's the people that are approving these things that have to represent our residents in the town and the impact that these parking, situations are going to have for years to come. So I disagree with that. And I think going back to what I said, a developer comes in, they want density. Perhaps they should have it. It should be reviewed, and then they should provide ample parking to compensate for it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on a little bit to housing. I'm interested. Do you think Needham's current housing and growth policies are sufficient? And if not, where would you focus your attention on the planning board? Let's start with Gary here.
Can you just repeat that question?
So do you think Needham's current, housing policies, what it's done to encourage growth in the recent years is sufficient? Or do you think we need to focus our attention and add more policies to increase housing?
Well, I think my fellow residents spoke clearly, with the referendum recently. I lived through that. I hated to see that for our town, that those issues got to that level. But I think the response was overwhelming. Throughout this campaign, I've had the fortunate ability to talk to hundreds of people door to door and through Zooms and other means. I feel a general consensus with that still exists. So I feel that, where we are with the base plan is appropriate for Needham right now, perhaps forever. I think that, that's what Needham residents felt was applicable. I think that gives us a great place to build from. I think that offers growth opportunities. And then there's other things that the town can look at in the future if they wanted to add more density outside of the MBTA, perhaps through overlays or friendly 40Bs and whatnot. Prior to MBTA, I thought Needham has done a great job with housing, actually. I mean, you've got, they met the 40B requirement a few years ago. I believe now our affordable housing stock is well over the 10%, or well over, I think it's 12.75%, maybe somewhere in that range. So we've got the affordable housing. We had that big development that went in off of Greendale over there. I think there's been a lot of projects where we've done a great job building multifamily housing. And so I'm proud of where Needham is in that regard. I'm excited about the new growth and opportunities that will be coming through the MBTA Act and perhaps some of the other methods. But I think we're doing a great job. And I think that where we are now is a good balance.
Gary, I think a lot of our businesses would disagree that, in the years before MBTA or even now, Needham is doing a great job on housing. They're really feeling the housing crunch. They're struggling to retain workers, struggling to retain employees, really long commutes for all their workers. I'm wondering, Oscar, do you agree that Needham has done a good job on housing in the last several years? And do you think we need to expand our opportunities?
Well, I will respectfully disagree with my colleague. that we are in good shape with housing, because I've had lots of conversations, and we are by no means serving all the housing needs we have. And I hear that from our residents, our seniors, our young people who want to move to town, members of our schools or hospitals who want to come and live in town. You name it. We're not necessarily meeting. We have young adults with who are aging out of their programs at 22 and looking for places where they might have some service to be able to live and walk in town and have a kind of a good walkable environment for them to be able to live in the community they're familiar with. So there are many kinds of housing that are harder than just market rate housing. And we also know that affordable is a very tricky word. There are so many kinds of affordable, market affordable, and then deeply affordable for NHA. We are doing very well, I think, to be supporting our Needham Housing Authority and adapting Linda Chambers and Seabeds Cook to be upgraded, long overdue, and also to potentially add more units there. So that's huge. That's a part of our needs. But we also have ADUs that are coming. They can also serve a very small portion. So we need to continue to do more. We did pass the baseline, and that did start the ball rolling. And I know that Matt Borelli is very happy and took advantage of some of those number adjustments. So we have to keep our eye targeting those kinds of adjustments in our zoning so that we can have, for instance, he was able to build 14 instead of 6 units. And those units are smaller and those rents are lower. And there are more affordable units that are subsidized in that project. That's huge. That's a big push. It's not many more units, but it's more units. So we need to keep trying to be creative and thoughtful. And now we can do that together as a community, decide on where we want to see all of this kind of growth across town, as it's going to take decades, but it's a thinking ahead.
Gary, do you have a response there?
Sure. No, I think my opponent, he wasn't hearing the Needham residents loud and clear when he was a proponent for yes, and he's not hearing them now that the base plan was accepted. And what I said previously wasn't that I didn't think we needed growth. You had asked about business, and my, Oscar referred to adding houses of affordability and senior living. I couldn't agree with that more, but that's not business aspects. I mean, I think that any of these projects coming into town should absolutely be incentivized to look at 55 plus, things that we can have people age in place that have lived here and need them for a long time, like myself, and even more years. They want to downsize and go to 55 plus, that would free up housing in that regard, which would help with inventory release, affordability, and having an affordable aspect to these projects to the degree they can, I think is absolutely fantastic and something that we need. But Needham is clear, and I've walked through it. I mean, the base plan, I don't look at it as a good start. It's where we are. It's what the town wanted and what we accepted. And there's a lot of growth inherent in that. And I think that when we initiate that slowly, gradually, and get it in the scale of the neighborhood, that we will try to get those things. We will try to get senior housing. We will get more affordability. And if the town wants further, we have the options for that. We can overlay. We can add overlay districts. We can add, other relaxed zoning that we can control. One of the biggest problems with the MBTA Act is it relaxes zoning so much that the town loses control on what's there, right? No reasonable project should be denied. In fact, developers come in, the relaxed standards, they don't even have to pay for infrastructure. It's not required that they have to update infrastructure, which is a current problem with some of these projects coming in. I believe there's been a couple of lawsuits filed in this regard. They come in with a high density project and they don't have to update the roadways or the sewer system for it. The town doesn't either. So that creates a kind of catch-22 in and of itself. So I love the idea of the housing, and we have the base plan, which is a great thing to work at for the next, several years to come. But I also believe that if we're going to have development outside and beyond that, that at least we should have some more control, and that may be outside the MBTA Act. So I'll just end on that note. Thank you.
And Oscar, I'm going to give you a chance to respond there if you want to, but.
Well, obviously the businesses are asking for more affordable housing for their employees, and we know that that's true for the hospitals and for our schools and for our small businesses. So, and other corporations that are wanting to come here, businesses that want to get started. So, the more we can support our business community, the commercial tax base can grow. So it is a win-win for us because we're competing with other communities for other projects next door. So the more we can be a welcoming community that has more housing choices that do serve our community needs, our resident needs, and future residents, and also all of our businesses. I think it's valuable that we look for more housing choices And that means we have to be involved in thinking creatively about how we do that as a group and where we think that all can happen. So
And Gary, I saw you shaking your head when he said, businesses want more affordable housing for their workers. Wondering what you think there in terms
And
of
I wasn't
workforce
I
housing.
wasn't shaking my head at that. I was shaking my head about the corporations. And I think that, by default, as you start to see some of this density come in, you're going to see a lot of mixed use proposals. And I think there'll be a great opportunity for corporations to come in, which I fully support. And like I said, under the base plan, there's a significant number of units allowed under that, and we'll see that. And then maybe there'll be some other projects that have to come in, whether they request a zone change or we provide some overlay zoning in certain areas to encourage that type of thing. So I think corporations coming in and having a vibrant new retail space is paramount. So I absolutely agree with that. As far as businesses telling me that they need to add housing, I mean, sure, businesses want density, but I'm hearing the smart, savvy entrepreneur business people in our town tell me that, yeah, we want more density. They're not telling me they need affordable housing for workers for their businesses. I haven't heard that but one time. What I'm hearing is that to increase density would increase foot traffic, provided that it comes with the right infrastructure and parking. So people that are savvy in business know that you can't have one without the other, or you can run into an area that might be too congested. Needham Street in Newton, maybe, for example. I manage a small property in Newton that has a bank branch in it, and the same national chain opened one on Needham Street in Newton down by the TJ Maxx some years ago, 6 years ago. And after 6 years, the FDIC deposit to that branch are only 20% of the one that I manage. That's a 30-year-old building that we built, right? Why is that? Well, it's parking. The one I manage has 36 parking spaces. It's not as high density. If you have to get from one end to Needham Street to the other, it can take 20 minutes, and people will actually deter from that and go to the other branch. That's the same general theory with business. So you add the density, you have mixed use, you add new commercial infrastructure, and you add housing. Housing's coming regardless. It's just a question of how much and how fast. And you make sure that it has the right infrastructure upgrades with it and absolutely has the parking. And I think it's a win-win for businesses and it's a win-win for our town.
And before we move on, Oscar, just want your reaction to one thing. Gary said that he's not hearing from a lot of businesses that they're asking for affordable housing for their workers. What are you hearing from our businesses on that?
absolutely, people are coming very long distances to come and work in the small businesses in town. So again, they could be living in an ADU, they could be living in a smaller apartment. So the more we can address the workforce size of things, which is what Matt's doing. I mean, he's done this in two projects currently, down 6 units across from McDonald's and then the 14 up and above Cath. Those are more thoughtful. This is another reason why we have to adjust our zoning, because the idea that units per acre is a number we want to try and legislate is not good. You take that number off the table, and then the market can decide how many units they want to bring in, because we want to control the sizes of those buildings. We don't necessarily, with a reduced parking requirement, we can allow for a little more flexibility on how many units can be built on a particular lot. And then that adds flexibility for the market to drive smaller units, which gives more people options for lower rents, or potentially, ideally, we're going to get to more options for sale housing. So again, it's all about more choices, more types of housing to give us diversity of choice and to give us, a way of spreading out that sort of gentle density, which is a key thing that we can do with a lot of the land that's already developed on small lots.
And Gary, do you agree that relaxing residential parking minimums can make units more affordable and smaller for workforce housing?
Not necessarily. No, I think that, units being smaller and more affordable, if they're provided as affordable units, are going to make them affordable. I mean, in our general area, units that hit market rate, I mean, look at some of the big buildings that have gone up in our surrounding communities like Wellesley and Newton. If they're not under the affordable tag, irregardless of parking, some of these are selling for close to $1,000 a square foot. Nothing affordable about that. So I think it's how it's proposed and whether it's tagged as affordable or not, personally.
Okay. So there's one town meeting warrant article this year. It's to rezone Hillcrest Gardens for a mixed use development. I'm wondering, do you support that citizens petition or not? And we'll start with Oscar here.
Yes, I do. And the reason that's important is that we think about what that end of town actually can be. And I think the two churches that are next to Warren will do what they're going to do. And I think those would, ideally, they would be either stay as churches or they'd be transformed into some sort of housing that's going to respect those buildings because some of those structures are very worth saving. But I think at that particular site where Hillcrest Gardens is, that is kind of an appropriate end cap for what's happening downtown. It's sort of, the sad thing is we love Hillcrest Gardens. It was a wonderful image of a building. And I think the challenge then is to say, um, that was a unique user, and that is going away. And what would be a good solution for that area? And I think some kind of thoughtful scale to that, the certain kind of units that could go in there, and treating that parking safely, and which I think they've done. They pulled that building back so there wouldn't be there's more visibility. So I think it will be. It'll be interesting to see how they develop that, but I think it is an opportunity. It's a unique case where that particular parcel could become a little bit denser and it could complete sort of the end of that downtown and not have any significant real impacts on what's going further down Great Plain towards Warren.
Great. Same question to you, Gary. Would you support that citizens petition?
Well, I think I support some development on the site. I haven't looked at a full set of plans on it yet because it's going through the citizens petition, like you said, in town meeting. I have skimmed over some of the renderings and some of the initial data with the project, and I think the initial plans look, the ones that I saw look like they're, favorable in design, keeping some of the character and scale of the neighborhood, but I'd want to take a closer look. If I had concerns about it,
Do you at least think that density is appropriate and redevelopment of that site is appropriate?
I do. I do. If I were to have concerns about it, I think it would be in regards to the citizen petition coming via the town meeting method and not to the planning board directly. I haven't seen that in town before, so that's something that I am looking into and had to look into a little bit. I think a zone change may be appropriate on that site. Again, I haven't looked at it in totality, so I'm not making a representation 100% on that. But I think it is appropriate, and I think it's a place where would be appropriate, even though I know Hillcrest Gardens was, a cherished place for years and years. I think that doing something there is accurate and appropriate. I think that making sure it comes to the planning board and allowing the planning board control of it, normally when you have a zone change, that can be good, right? It can be good for a planning board to look at it because the developer would need that zone change to be able to do what they want to do there, which is a good thing because it gives the planning board some control, if you will, or some input into what may or may not be approved there and making sure that it meets the scale and has adequate parking and all those things. So if this process is circumventing that, then that's where I would have concern. I believe that ultimately it should go in front of the planning board for final decisions. I mean, in a town, a planning board is supposed to be established for people that have expertise to some degree to look at these projects and evaluate them. I'm not insinuating the town meeting does not have that. But if we have a board set up for that process, then I believe that board should be used, and the control or the permission to change the zone should lie with the board that has that expertise to do that, because that's the back and forth that the town has to work with the developer, other than an abutter coming up, which is also a very powerful force. The town should have some control there. So I guess if I had concerns, it would be in that regard, but I do think the development is in a favorable location.
And I think it will eventually go in front of the planning board for either an up or down. But I think
they
it's going to go
may, they may grant the zone change before it does. Hence, like I said, you're taking a little bit of what the planning board has in the way of negotiating with them off the table.
Yes. Okay, great. Now let's go on to go ahead, Oscar.
I'll just clarify. I agree with Gary that the process ideally is through the planning board, and I think as it has been, they did have several conversations with the planning board about this, and there was a fair amount of feedback given. I do think the process will probably be a referral back to the planning board, I would guess, if I had to be a betting man, because I think it's going to require that it does get factored into what is a bigger picture down there. So I would agree that it is ultimately a planning board decision, and it is something that the town should be adjudicating with that kind of a process. I suspect that'll come back.
And another important site and a site of real interest to town is the Muzzy site, which will likely not host lab development as originally approved. What would you like to see on that site instead, Oscar?
Yeah, well, I'm excited from there. What Bill, for instance, talked about recently. I think they're still trying to figure out exactly what kind of program mix they want. There's going to be some need for some zoning relief, probably. Do they want to do more than the 240 allowed for the residential cap? And there'd be potentially some small business there for medical office. I mean, they're thinking about hospitality, all of which require much more market study to really figure out what a final mix would be and to also get feedback from the community. The thing that I do know is that the planning or the parking impacts for something like that is going to be easier to manage than it would have been had it been more fully commercial in its original thought. There'd be a more distributed use and a lower traffic flow on Gould, and so I think it's a win-win to have that kind of a change in program. I do think it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves. Just to keep an eye on that. It seems like they want to target a couple of different kinds of residential users, maybe seniors, maybe for sale product. Again, I feel it's a good location for something like that. I think of it as a great way to kind of marry some residential with that community, but also to add some density that could be downhill, not unlike Modera, where this is the downhill piece that's larger, that's downhill. This also has a kind of a downhill site, so that's going to be able to do that. So I think it's definitely it's good to see what's going to happen. I'm excited to see how it evolves.
And Gary, same question to you. What would you want to see on that site?
Yeah, well, I'd like to see a final proposal. I know there's been a lot of talk back and forth about what may happen there. I understand that the lab space is probably a moot point at this stage of the game for them. But things if I was looking at what would be incorporated, I think that's a great place and location to do a mixed use component. So I'd love to see, personally, I think our town could benefit from some commercial. And then the mixed use component, like I said previously, I mean, I would love to see some 55 plus component or some senior availability with some affordable housing as well, because there's a place where there will be some density. And I think that if a good portion of that could be in that regard, I think that would be beneficial to our town and all those people to free up housing in other areas. I also think that those are lower impact on our school system, which is of a big concern with any development, right? Do we have the capacity for this in that regard? And I think that those type of uses, a little bit more of the residential components of those categories, as well as some retail units and the commercial, bring in better parking as well. I mean, I think whether, they have the on-site parking, you do a garage, I think so it'd be important to look. And like I said previously, just being repetitive, is that it should contain itself. You do a traffic study, you do a parking analysis, and that they provide on site an ample amount of parking for that, so that people will want to go to the facility, people will want to go to the businesses, people will want to purchase the units or move there and have it have the least impact on our traffic and school systems as possible. So I hope
And sorry, Judge, just real quickly. The president of Bullfinch, who owns that property, said they would probably need closer to 500 units of housing. Senior housing may be included in that to redevelop that site. Do you think that's an appropriate amount, Gary?
I think it's heavy, but I think every developer comes in with a number at first. We'll have to look at it. Like I said, it has to be looked at in conglomeration with everything I just said, right? So, does it provide ample parking for that? What's it's going to be its impact on school system per how they divide up those units? What's the scale and mass of the building, right? So I think, and then the infrastructure as well, that going to get upgraded and the roadways to it. So you have to look at it in the package. You can't just say it's going to be 500 units or is 700 appropriate or is it 300? It's somewhere in that, right? It's going to be hundreds of units. I agree with that. But I think that how they propose it, and they're very skilled developers, so I would expect to see a very comprehensive and concise plan, and that will be analyzed. So first instinct, it sounds heavy to me, but I'd like to look at all the details before I give a final answer on it.
And Oscar, same to you. Do you think 500 units is an appropriate level of housing there? Too much?
Again, it's all in what those units are. I mean, we talked about units before. It's what are they? How big are they? Are they all smaller units or there's a mixture of studios in one? So you can have higher number of units. It is a question of what's the spread in the market and who is it serving. So it is about balancing and seeing what it is that they're actually proposing. So it's a number that, I agree it sounds high, but I think it also can be, if it's proven through some analysis and some impact analysis, I think it's something to think about and talk about.
And Gary, do you support the proposed zoning changes headed to town meeting that would stem the rise of teardowns it would affect single resident districts.
So I was a member of the prior large house study committee back in 2016 and 2019 as we put some framework together on the zoning at that time. I'm a little disappointed because when I knew that there was another committee that was formed a year ago, I thought it was a great opportunity to edit what we had established, the foundation that we provided, to do some, possibly further restrictions. I do believe that some restrictions to some degree are warranted and necessary. I was disappointed in the proposal that I looked at because I believe that it's got a lot of unintended consequences in it. And I also believe it targets and restricts our SRB district unproportionately and in the wrong areas. I think it gets really aggressively restrictive at lots at a 10,000 square foot metric. And that's where you want to cut the fat. You want to get a reduction at 10,000, and then I think there's a great place to cut between 10 and 15,000. That's where a lot of these big houses are popping up, and this is where a lot of the mass and bulk is. And contrary to that, I think this proposal targets over aggressively at that mark, which will have significant impacts on permittability, developability, floor plan layouts that people I know want that would probably choose to build elsewhere. So I think it was a missed opportunity because I believe that there are so many ways to have done this better and so many ways to have provided cuts in our system that could do both what the residents of Needham want and deserve and should have, as well as something that doesn't have to be, so consequential and detrimental to the market and to our growth pattern. So I believe things could be revised. I've sent in many suggestions to the board. I was just on a Zoom this morning with Oscar as well, being involved in that process, and to try to offer some potential solutions to what was proposed that I think would be beneficial, that would hit both boxes, which is what you want to do as a member of serving the community, is to say, okay, how do we get this mass and bulk out, and at the same time not have catastrophic results for people that own homes and that are selling them, that don't have to have their value completely decimated by that result. And you can do both. And unfortunately, I don't feel this proposal does that.
And Oscar, same question to you. It sounds like Gary doesn't support them as is. What about you? I think you're on mute, Oscar.
I think one of the things that we, as a committee, I was working on the committee that brought our year of research to the planning board for them to have good materials for them to analyze and adjust as necessary, and then to continue a discussion with the public to be able to bring something to town meeting for the town meeting to make a decision about what the community wants to do to adjust the sizes of houses on lots. I think what we know from the research we did and handed on to planning board is that Needham has been working at a slightly higher, size house than all of our surrounding communities, somewhere in the 20 to 30% size house. And I think greater than other communities. And I think the challenge there is that we're not saying you're not going to get a certain size house, 5,000 or 6,000 square foot house. It's just a matter of what lot it's more appropriately placed on. So there are demands for these larger houses. We know there's a market demand for some of the houses that have a few more bedrooms. But there's also a lot that's getting built that's just very big. And I think the adjustments that we have looked at are also addressing the actual sizes of houses that are getting built. So the adjustments that we're doing to try and reduce the volume of houses, or the volume of a house, is essentially the greatest impact on what you see visually. And I think we have analyzed that enough to know that we can make an adjustment at that maximum formula. So we're really saying what is the maximum that can be built? That's what we have to adjust our formulas for. In reality, what's getting built is smaller. And so the adjustments that we're actually proposing are somewhat in line. In some cases, they're a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but we're essentially hitting a new measurement that's closer to what's built.
Do you stand by those adjustments? And if you were on the planning board, would you support those articles as is going to town meeting?
Well, we produced information and we gave some options and recommended, two sizes that are essentially getting us a little bit closer to what's being built in our surrounding communities. So it's not our decision. It's now something for the planning board to refine, decide how they want to bring
But if
that.
you were on the planning board, and you might be on the planning board,
I might be.
yeah.
So
So what would you do there?
I think it would be for us to then bring something to the town meeting that's got options, potentially bring to a town meeting, so that the town can decide. But I think that's ultimately where we are. We have to, if we are playing at a larger size house than other communities, we have to decide if we want to make those adjustments. We know that it's a very, there's a lot of people who want to live in town, and we know that 70%, 80% of the houses that are being sold on a given year are going to homeowners, and a small percentage, 20 to 30% are actually part of this transformation to bigger houses. So there are a lot of people still buying homes. So we have to be mindful of how much as a community we think we need to adjust the sizes of these homes that are so that they might be a little bit more appropriately sized to their lots. And that's a decision that we need to just bring the information to town meeting and have the community decide.
Gary, do you have a response there? Or?
Yeah, I just think again, it's Oscar was on the committee that put this in front of him and then says it's up to the planning board to decide. But he voted, I mean, he spent a year shaping, constructing, analyzing, and putting forth his scenarios that he feels he stands behind, and he sent to the planning board. So it shouldn't be a shocker that if he was on the planning board, he would stand behind them as proposed. And I think the biggest difference here is in where to cut the size. Like I said, there certainly needs to be some reduction. The last committee, we left the FAR at a 0.38 number on 10,000 square foot lots, and we didn't reduce it to 0.36 until they got to be 12,000 square feet. Where that laid to be a problem is that, on a 10,000 square foot lot, you could build a 3,800 square foot house. And as the lot grew to, say, just under the 12,000 metric for the drop, you could get a 4,600 square foot house on 2 floors at that metric. And that is where I know the complaints are coming from. That is where the mass and the bulk are. And so a very simple fix is to cut the fat or trim the fat in that area. It's not the 34 or 3,600 square foot house that has the mass or the bulk. It's as it grows from that number to almost 5,000 square feet, instead of over restricting on the base end, because what you do then is you'll hinder the floor plans and people just won't build here. It's not that you'll reduce the size. People will be deterred from economic activity at all. And that's the problem with it.
And Oscar, do you have a response there? You're on mute, I think.
Yeah, I'm an architect, and I've worked with the designs of these houses, and I think with what we've been considering for these adjustments to FAR and coverage, the consideration is that we feel there's adjustments in there that can be made to these buildings, these plans, to allow for that flexibility of houses, and slight reductions are not going to make a huge difference in what's going to be produced. Again, every lot has got its own characteristics. We did not want to change the side yard setbacks because we felt that was important to allow the flexibility side to side. The biggest challenge in these houses is designing with a garage in the house. And we included that square footage of the garage in the footprint because we feel it's important for those kinds of designs and designers and builders to determine how they want to spend their square footage. And we know the hardest square footage is between the garage and the property line, so that you're figuring out how you're going to essentially create an L-shaped space around that garage. So it is important that we keep the flexibility in that ground floor because it's also going to be used as a basement. So,
Gary, real quick response.
Yeah,
and then we got to move on.
Oscar talks about flexibility in the first floor, but then out of the other tongue, his actual proposal reduces lot coverage by, 3% or nearly 300 square feet on the first floor, which will hamper first floor layouts as well as hamper designs for the second floor because of the constriction on the first floor. So that's completely contrary to what's actually been proposed by that committee. And then also, he's talking about a slight reduction, which, this proposal as proposed, apples to apples from what you can build now on a 10,000 square foot lot to what's proposed, is a 24.68% reduction. And if that's slight, I mean, I don't know what the definition is for some people on slight,
Thank you.
but that's massive. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on. Unless yeah, so I think we're gonna move on. Yep, 1 point.
One point is that impact, that whatever that number you're calculating is again, I'm mentioning that the changes that we're proposing are to what is the maximum size potentially built. there are lots of houses that are getting built that are not meeting that. And those are the houses that are down in a lower percentage change of 7 to 4 to 11%, whatever that particular house design was. So there's a lot of design changes and unique things about how architects solve this problem when you've given a problem to, how much can you fit on some kind of square footage? And there are creative solutions to do that. So I think it's all a question of how to manage what we think is an appropriate size for these houses on these lots.
Okay. So we're going to end with some, different questions, not necessarily about Needham. If elected, a key aspect would be working on infrastructure, and you're going to make, key decisions on the town's roads, bridges, and transit. To that end, do you think the big dig, in Boston was a marvel or a waste of money, Gary?
Well, I think the big dig in Boston was a marvel or a waste of money.
Yeah.
Maybe both. I think it was an
If you
appropriate.
had to pick one.
Yeah. I would go with marvel, I guess. I think it was a phenomenal project with a lot of undertaking there that accomplished a lot of proper end result goals. I think it was a massive project to manage. And I think that I think that Boston did a great job with it in the end. And I think it's, any project like that is very difficult. And I think the end result speaks for itself. I think it had more benefits than cons in the end. And I'm proud of Boston for what they accomplished with it.
Oscar?
So, yeah, I think it was, at the end of the day, it was a success, albeit, way beyond any budget that anyone ever thought. But the greatest transformation is the Rose Kennedy Greenway, because that took away the eyesore of these elevated highways, and it cut off the waterfront. So we are woven back together again with our waterfront. That's huge. That's a big plus. But when you think about the decisions that could have been done, they could have built a tunnel for, I think it was another $6 million ad for the original budget, which was, I think, $2 billion. And they were going to build a tunnel to connect South Station and North Station. And they said, nah, we probably shouldn't spend that money right now. And they didn't. And so those are the kinds of things that you feel, oh, it's a looking back in hindsight, that's challenging. Could have done it, and now it would be cost prohibitive. So it was a very successful project, and yet lots of good lessons to learn.
Okay, great. And the last question of today's debate, who would be on your Needham Mount Rushmore, Oscar?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. I kind of divided it into start at the most important. So we have to respect what we have been fortunate to call Needham, which is the land owned by our indigenous community before us. So Chief Nahoyden is number one. And I'd say that the other sort of critical component of the how Needham evolved, and someone pivotal to that was William Carter, which is essentially started Needham as a community of both business and community residents. We had a diverse community that supported that business. So there was an engine of growth, but it was also a way of creating community that was diverse economically, racially, ethnically. So it was a great foundation for what Needham has become and has as a background. And then I'd have to say N.C. Wyeth, because of the ability to express how we see the world around us, and to bring us into his vision of that, and there's remarkable that he was a part of this community. And last is the inspiration of Sunita Williams, because she has inspired our kids, our school, shown the value of our schools, and that she can be an inspiration for kids to shoot for the stars.
Gary?
Well, so we have three of the four the same, actually, but absolutely first on my list was William Nahoyden. He brought us April 14th, Nahoyden Day, which stands for negotiation and collaboration. He was a key negotiator in land deals to acquire land that is now Needham from Dedham on April 14th of 1680. He was very educated and bilingual. He spoke English and Algonquian, and he was known as a praying Indian, converted to Christianity from Native American religion. And he collaborated with John Eliot, another prominent Needham person, translated the Bible into Algonquian language with Eliot. And this is who the school is named for, and also where my children went. So I think he's my number one choice. William Carter, of course, another great choice, founded Carter's Clothing Company, created jobs and economic stability for generations, and anchored Needham as a place for working families. NC Wyeth, Newell Converse Wyeth. He brought us culture and identity. He's a renowned American illustrator who grew up in Needham, brought national attention through iconic artwork, and represents the cultural and creative identity of the town. And then lastly, I believe William Emerson Baker brought us vision and land stewardess. He built Ridge Hill Farms, one of the largest estates in Needham, major landowner who shaped the town's physical landscape and represented long-term thinking about land use and development. And in summary, I just think Needham's legacy wasn't built by one idea, it was built by balance. William the Hoyden acquired and negotiated our town. William Baker shaped our town's landscape. NC Wyeth gave us culture and identity. William Carter created economic strength so people could live here. And through the great efforts and contributions of these four, Needham has a solid foundation that's rich in balance and culture that still continues today.
And we don't have time for a closing statement. I'll give Oscar 30 seconds, kind of like what Gary did at the end there.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, appreciate the time constraints. Yeah, I think the thing that I've learned in all the conversations I've had with people across town, residents, leaders, managers, our business owners, our institutions, and continuing to have all those conversations. We have a lot of very passionate people in town, and it is all about talking and listening and working together. And I think that what I believe there is an agenda, and the agenda is what's best for Needham. And I think we have to trust that the people who live in town, work in town, are doing their jobs as elected or as volunteers or as people who want to be engaged, and we have to respect that. And I am excited to bring all the experience I've had as an architect and a planner to go through the process of understanding what their needs are for a particular project and how to solve problems. And then to do that collaboratively to reach solutions that are benefiting this town and keeping the stewardship of this town first and foremost in my mind. But I believe I can dedicate a lot of great skills over the decades to help that process. Thank you. And I would humbly ask for the support on April 14th. Thanks, Max.
And Gary, do you want that 30 seconds as well?
Yeah, if I could just try to reduce my 90-second close real quick. I'd just like to say that I've lived here in Needham for the past 25 years. As I mentioned, raised our two sons here. My wife's a teacher, Tanita Williams. What I bring to this race is practical experience of a skill set built over more than 30 years in building development and property management. I understand the process because I've lived it, from zoning regulations and special permits to how projects move from an idea on paper to something built in the real world. And what I've learned is that what looks good on paper can feel very different once it's actually built. And once it's built, there's no return policy. I'm a husband, a dad, and now a semi-retired builder. No one asked me to run. I chose to run. And I have no agenda other than to represent my fellow residents of Needham and what you want for our town. I feel now is the time to step up and serve so that the decisions from the planning board reflect what residents want and what they don't want. For me, every project comes down to a simple question. Does this make our town better? And how do the neighbors feel about it? If the answer isn't clear, we must take a closer look. I will always be accessible, open to conversation, and willing to listen because I love our town and we all want what's best for Needham. Thank you all for coming today. Appreciate it.
Thank you both so much. And a recording will be sent out to everyone after. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Max.